Ambassador, you know the issues that we're facing as a society, as an American society. I'm wondering if you think that the subject that brings us together today, this need for service and creating a culture of service, that herein might also lie the answer to some of the division among us.
I absolutely think it is. And I actually wrote about that in the last chapter of my book. My dream, Michael, is not only to see the recommendations of this extraordinary commission implemented and brought to fruition. If I could dream, my dream would be, and I recognize that this is costly, that there'll be legal questions, all sorts of objections, but I wish we could have mandatory national civilian service in this country so that every kid between the ages of 18 and 21 spent 6 or 12 months in national service, whether it's laying, broadband or building infrastructure or rehabilitating inner city schools and libraries. The reason I think service is so important, not only is it creating economic opportunity and training and skills for those who may not otherwise have them, but most importantly, it's teaching us to understand and to know each other as Americans across different geographic, racial, socioeconomic lines as part of one nation and one community. The fundamental thing, Michael, is if we live together, if we work together, if we know each other as human beings, it's a whole lot harder to hate each other. And I think national service, maximized to the greatest extent possible, bringing in people from all sorts of backgrounds, not just the privileged, not just the poor, but everybody, to live and work in common purpose would be probably the most powerful thing we could do to heal our democracy and catalyze national unity. Now, in an era where we can't even get folks to agree to wear masks to save their own lives and that of their grandparents, I recognize what a tall order it is for anything to be compulsory. And that's why I call it a dream, or an aspiration. But I think the closer we can get to that, the better off we'll be. And that's why I think the recommendations are so powerful.
Well, I'm so glad that you're willing to go there. I would like to think that that's an issue that cuts across ideological lines. You wouldn't know this, Ambassador, but earlier in the presentation, I was speaking with Secretary Panetta, and I mentioned to him that my father, who served in the Korean conflict, always called that experience the common denominator. And he thought that his life had been changed by being on the same playing surface as, in this case, it was men, but men from all walks of life, from all parts of the country, of all races, who, when the haircut came and the meal came and the uniform, they were all equal in a way they had never been before. What makes you think that it's really just pie in the sky? I'd like to think that it's a doable conversation.
Well, I'd like to think it is too, but I think the challenge is obviously would be very expensive. I think it would be money extremely well spent, but it would also be arguably something that those who oppose mandates might challenge legally. And I don't know enough to say with confidence how that would play out. But I do think it's something we should aspire to get at least as close to that objective as possible, for the reasons that I said. I think it would be hugely beneficial in terms of helping to address economic and social disparities. I think it would be extremely beneficial in terms of building a civic-minded culture and an ethos of collaboration and community and collective purpose, which our democracy so needs. And it would help bind us together as a nation. You mentioned your dad, who served in the Korean War. My dad served in World War II with the Tuskegee Airmen. And, as powerful as that experience was, and as proud as he was of it, he was also very tortured by it, because he served in a segregated military, fighting on behalf of freedom for everybody but his own people. And that legacy of still being separated, of not viewing ourselves as sufficiently part of a whole, has largely dissipated, at least in structural and legal terms. But in psychological terms, I think, as we're being reminded in recent weeks, it remains. And so to bridge those gaps is really a real core part of our national mission, in my judgment.
I'll leave this subject, I promise, in a moment, but hypothetically speaking, if your government service were to continue, and let's say that from a very close chair, you had the ear of a commander in chief, might you be inclined to advocate that which you've just espoused here?
Well, I'm inclined to advocate. Yes, is the short answer. Yes, but I start by advocating for the implementation of the recommendations of the National Commission, because I recognize, having served a long time in policy making and in government, that rarely do we make extraordinary leaps in one bound. And while the recommendations of the Commission are exceedingly ambitious, as was discussed, as I caught the end of the last panel, they are achievable, and they ought to be more achievable in a time of economic recession, if not depression, in a time of COVID, at a time when our social, economic, and racial disparities have been laid so bare for all to see. An investment that that brings all of us and all of our talents to bear, and helps to heal those divides and provide economic opportunity to not only those that are locked out traditionally, as important as that is, and the report talks about opportunity youth and and the formerly incarcerated as important targets for this effort. But we also have a whole cadre of high school graduates and college graduates coming into a workforce where there's nothing for them to do. And yet we have enormous needs in terms of infrastructure, in terms of a contact tracing core, all of the national service legislation that's up on the Hill. These are things that meet the moment. So I would be advocating for all of the above, and then for even greater ambition.